Thank you for joining this month's Connect with Control-M session. My name is Drew Casas and I'll be your facilitator for this webinar. Today we will explain how to secure communication between Control-M server and Control-M agents by enabling and configuring SSL. We have three presenters today from the Control-M support team: Guilherme Araujo, Inigo Rodriguez, and Daniel Levy. We recommend going to full screen mode during this presentation by pressing the full screen button. Please note that this presentation is available via the Files pod at the bottom of your screen. For any questions you may have during the presentation, please post them in the Q&A pod. We will be addressing your questions at the end of the session. Today we'll explain the topics you see here regarding configuring SSL connections between the Control-M server and Control-M agent components. We'll go through an overview as well as a diagram showing the basic layout of Control-M SSL configurations. Then we'll discuss how to configure these secure connections. Lastly, we'll also cover how to make these connections secure using the Control-M Automation API. For our first demonstration, Guilherme will discuss an overview of Control-M SSL. Please go ahead.
Thank you for that introduction, Drew. Hi everyone and welcome. I'm Guilherme, and in this short presentation I'll walk you through how Control-M uses SSL, Secured Sockets Layer, to protect communication between its components and what steps are required to configure it successfully. SSL, or more accurately TLS in modern environments, it's what ensures that every command, every job update, and every file transfer between Control-M components remain private and verified. So what is SSL in Control-M? Control-M relies on SSL and its successor TLS to ensure all communication between components, from clients to EM server, from EM server to Control-M server, and between the server and its agents. So even if someone were to intercept that data, it would be unreadable. The idea is simple. All messages are encrypted, authenticated, and protected against tampering. As you can see in this diagram, Zone 1 represents the clients, such as Control-M Web or Workload Automation Client, the thick line. Zone 2 is where the Enterprise Manager server resides. Zone 3 includes one or more Control-M server and their agents. Each zone can have SSL independently configured depending on the level of security or environment required. For example, some customers start by encrypting only the client to EM connection and then gradually expand to include server-to-agent communications once the certificates are standardized. To set up SSL in Control-M, you'll follow three main steps: get signed certificates, deploy the SSL, enable SSL. Let's go through each one of these steps so you can understand what they involve. Step 1. Get signed certificates. Every secure setup starts with certificates. Control-M supports the PEM encoded X.509 certificates, which is the standard format used across most systems. You can get your certificates in two ways: from your security administrator. Typically, they will give you a PKCS12 key store or a separate .pem file, which has the private key, the signed certificate, and the full certificate chain up to the root CA. Or by generating them yourself. Using a certificate signing request, or CSR, you would send that CSR to a recognized certificate authority, and they will issue a signed certificate back to you. For production environments, BMC strongly recommends using a certificate signed by a trusted CA. But if you're doing a proof of concept or a lab demo, you can use the default self-signed certificate generated from the Control-M Configuration Manager. So, step 2. Deploy the SSL. Once you have your certificates ready, the next step is to deploy them. This means installing the key store that contains your private key and certificate chain on each relevant Control-M component. You can do this directly from the Configuration Manager or by using the deployment script shipped with Control-M. The key point here is consistency. Every component that participates in SSL must trust the same certificate authority. The key store contains three important pieces: the private key, the signed certificate, and the certificate chain that proves authenticity back to the root CA. In practice, this step establishes the trust relationship so that when Control-M components talk to each other, they can verify and identify before data is exchanged. Step 3. Finally, you enable SSL for the specific components. This can be done through the Configuration Manager, GUI, or by editing configuration parameters on each component. Once you enable all traffic, for example, from EM server to Control-M server, and from server to agents, it will now flow through encrypted SSL TOS channels. At this point, you will want to test connectivity between components to confirm everything works fine. For example, verifying the agent status or opening Control-M Web in the browser using HTTPS. Here, we have some important documentation to help you further in case you want to check other steps and configurations. First link is the documentation page of the introduction to SSL I just presented, and below it's an explanatory KA about how to configure the Control-M server to connect in either SSL or TCP mode with the Control-M agent. That concludes my presentation on Control-M SSL configuration. Thank you for watching, and now back to Drew for the continuation of our session.
Thank you, Guilherme, for reviewing SSL within Control-M. Our next demo is about how to configure secure SSL connections between the Control-M server and Control-M agents. We have Inigo, who is going to help us through this demonstration. Inigo, please go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction, Drew. My name is Inigo, and I'm working as a technical support analyst. Today, we'll be discussing securing Control-M communication between Control-M server and Control-M agent in version 9.0.22. Here is today's agenda. We will start with an overview. Next, I will talk about the requirements to configure SSL between Control-M server and Control-M agent. We will then continue with our demonstration. We will have a quick recap of the actions performed during the demonstration, and finally, I will give you some useful resources that will help you to set up SSL in your environment. We split the Control-M communication in 3 zones. Zone 3 allows you to configure SSL between Control-M server and Control-M agent. By enabling SSL in Zone 3, we will be securing the communication from Control-M server to Control-M agent and the opposite way. The following diagram shows the multiple ways we can configure SSL on zones. We are currently discussing Zone 3 between Control-M server and Control-M agent. BMC recommends that you bring your own certificate. You can get a certificate signing request, use the certificate signing request file to obtain the certificate file and the certificate change with a .pem extension from a recognized certified authority. You can then deploy the key store with a private key, the signed certificates, and the certificate chain, which means the root and intermediate certificates. We assume that customers have the private key and the signed certificate, root, and intermediate certificate issued by your certified authority. A P12 key store must be generated and must be done for each component, Control-M server and Control-M agent. In the key store, we'll import the private key of the component and the chain certificate, the root, the intermediate, and the signed certificate. By using CTM keytool utility, we'll create a P12 key store with the chain certificate and private key. We'll make sure that in the Control-M server, by using the utility CTM-SYS, we set the right configuration. Then we'll enable SSL on the agent from the Control-M configuration manager. I will show it to you in the demonstration. Let's go to our demo environment. As you can see, I have my Control-M server that is running on Linux and the agent that is running on Windows. Both components are in version 9.0.22. For this test, I want to enable SSL communication between Control-M server and Control-M agent. We'll start by generating the certificate signing request. Let's go to the Linux server where our Control-M server is running. Here is the path where I'm located. If I list the content of the directory, we see the file csr_params.sfg. In this file, we set the values that we will use to fill out the certificate signing request. This file will be signed by the certificate authority. The most relevant parameter is the common name, or SN, because this value is the fully qualified domain name of the server where we are going to request the certificate for. To create the certificate signing request, we must run the utility CTM key tool. Don't forget that we must specify the full path of the CTM key tool utility. This is the command that we enter. We specify with the parameter create_CSR that we create a certificate signing request, and the password parameter is the password to access the private key. In our case, it's going to be change it. We hit enter, and we can see that the private key has been successfully created, and also the certificate signing request. Now you must send the certificate signing request to your security team or certificate authority, and with that certificate signing request, they will create the change certificate that we need to establish SSL communication on the Control M server. The same applies for the Control M agent. From your certificate authority, you should have received 3 files. The server certificate, which is the signed certificate for the server, the root certificate from the certified authority that signed the certificate, and the intermediate certificate. I have also moved to this directory the private key that is generated after creating the certificate signing request, so I have all files in one place. As I have the root and intermediate certificates from the certificate authority, I need to merge those 2 certificates in one single file. I can just run this command and I will have both certificates in one single file. This is the root certificate and this is the intermediate certificate. Both certificates are now in one single file. Here is the OpenSSL command that we need to create a P12 key store. The arguments and inputs that we enter with the command can be found in the documentation. For this demo, these are the parameters that I'm using. Parameter in is the signed certificate. In key is the private key created when generating the certificate signing request. Export indicates that we will generate a key store. Pass out sets the password for the P12 key store that we are going to create. In this case, it's going to be change it. Pass in indicates the password of the private key. We need this one to be able to read the private key. Next, we have the parameter CA file. This parameter contains the root and intermediate certificate, the certificate that we just merged into the root certificate. That's why I specify here root ca.cert, which includes both the root certificate and the intermediate certificate. Next, we have the parameter chain. We use this parameter if in the previous one, CA file, we include more than one certificate. As we merge both root and intermediate certificate into one file, we must add this parameter. Finally, we have this parameter out, which indicates the name of the P12 key store. In our case, controlm.p12. We press enter to run the command, and we check if the key store has been created. It is also a good practice to check that the key store was created successfully and that it is accessible. We use the following command. Now we must enter the password that we set when creating the P12 key store. In my case, change it. Now we should be able to see the three certificates that we imported: the root certificate, the intermediate certificate, and the signed certificate of the server. Now we must verify also the private key, so we enter the password that we created earlier. In my case, is again changed. We verify, and now we can see that we are able to view the private key. Now that we can confirm that the key store is accessible and has the correct format, we can proceed to deploy the P12 key store with the utility CTM key tool. It is always a good practice to indicate the full path of the files we are going to import. It is also very important to put the full path for the specific CTM key tool utility that we are going to use. In our case, it is utility of the Control M server. This is the command that we are going to use. And as you can see, we have several parameters. We have key store, that is the full path of the key store that we just created, controlm.p12. We have the password, that is the one that we set to open the content of the key store. And we have also the pass key. The pass key indicates the full path of the 3.bin file. This file is an encryption key, which is used to encrypt the key store password in the environment's SSL configuration. I hit enter, and the output of the command indicates that the key store has been successfully imported. Now we have to do the same steps on our Control M agent. Control M agent is running on a Windows server, but the commands are the same. We follow also exactly the same steps as in the Control M server. After receiving the certificates from the certificate authority, root, intermediate, and signed certificate, we created our P12 key store. We can verify that the key store was created successfully by running the same command as in the Control M server. We enter the password, change it, and we can see that the three certificates have been imported to the key store. We can also verify the private key. We enter the same password, change it. Verify, and we can see again the private key. Now that our P12 key store looks okay, we can go ahead and proceed to deploy the P12 key store with utility CTM key tool of the Control M agent. After hitting enter, we see that the output of the command indicates that the key store has been successfully imported. Now we are ready to set up SSL between our Control M server and the Control M agent. Before enabling the SSL communication between Control M agent and Control M server, we can go and check a key parameter of Control M server. We enter the utility ctmsys. We go to the option 2, System Parameters. We go then to the next page, and here we check the value that we have in Secure Sockets Layer, Disable. This means that the Control M server is working in TCP mode. If I configure a Control M agent with SSL, the CTM will work with that specific agent in SSL and will not try to switch to TCP back. This is the option that we need to use when we are going to use SSL only for some Control M agents. If you change the parameter to Enable, you will have to recycle Control M server to apply the change. By enabling the Control M server to SSL means that Control M server will communicate only with SSL, with all Control M agents that the Control M server is handling. Once we have our Control M server with the right value, we can go to the Control M Configuration Manager and select our Control M agent. In Control M Configuration Manager, we navigate to the Control M agent. Right-click and go to Properties. In the display that opens, among other parameters, we find Secure Socket Layer, and we see it is disabled. We must enable it to allow the SSL communication between Control-M agent and Control-M server. I click OK. By doing this, we are telling Control-M server that it must use SSL communication with this specific Control-M agent. The change can take a few minutes, and it is possible that the agent goes to an available status while it is switching the communication from TCP to SSL. When Control-M agent is back again, we can validate that the communication is set to SSL. We can do it from the Control-M configuration manager by right-click on the Control-M agent and click on ping. Control-M agent status is available. Now we can use the utilities of the Control-M server and Control-M agent and test from each end the communication. On the Control-M agent, we run the utility ag_diag_com. This utility allows us to check the communication from the Control-M agent to the Control-M server. We select our Control-M agent. And as we see from the output, the agent is using the SSL protocol to communicate with the Control-M server. We also see that the system ping and the agent ping to the Control-M server both are successful. On the Control-M server, we can do a similar test by running ctm_diag_COMM. We must specify the fully qualified domain name of the Control-M agent. We hit enter. And again, we see that the communication protocol is set to SSL. And also all the pings, Unix, and the one from the Control-M server are both successful. After these two tests, we have proof that there is an SSL communication between Control-M agent and Control-M server. Here is a recap of the steps we have done during the demonstration. We generated a certificate signing request. We created a P12 key store and deployed the P12 key store using the CTM key tool utility on the Control-M. Finally, we configured the Control-M server and Control-M agent to communicate over SSL. Here are some useful resources for you. The link to the official documentation to set up SSL in Zone 3. A link to a knowledge base article where we describe the step-by-step SSL between Control-M server and Control-M agent. A video link of this presentation to watch at your suitable time. Many thanks for attending this presentation. We hope the information provided is useful and helps you to set up SSL in your Control-M environment. Back to you, Drew.
Thank you, Inigo, for showing us how to set up SSL between the Control-M server and Control-M agents. Next up, Daniel will demonstrate how to configure SSL between the Control-M agent and Control-M server using the Automation API. Daniel, please go ahead.
Thank you, Drew, for that introduction. In this section of our webinar, we'll go over the use of Control-M Automation API for automating the deployment of SSL certificates to Control-M agents. First, we'll cover the prerequisites, then we'll look at an overview of the steps, and finish up with a demonstration of the procedure. Note that this procedure is for agents that currently do not use SSL. For agents that already use SSL, you might consider temporarily disabling SSL to perform this procedure. Otherwise, it is possible to lose communication with the agent partway through. Also note that agent patches PAKAI.9.0.21.306 or PAFZ4.9.0.22.004 are required to deploy certificates through AAPI. Enterprise Manager version 9.0.21.200 or higher is required to enable SSL on agents through AAPI. These can be downloaded through the BMC Electronic Product Distribution site. My demo environment already has these installed. I also have the CTM command line utility set up for interacting with AAPI. It's useful for testing things out, but it's not required. This is because you can make AAPI REST calls from any application as long as it has connectivity and login credentials to the Enterprise Manager web server where the API is hosted. The final prerequisite for security is to have an Organization Internal Certificate Authority, or CA, which is dedicated to Control-M and is not an external third-party CA. With the prerequisites out of the way, we can look over the procedure. The first step is to generate a CSR, or Certificate Signing Request, on the agent. The second step is to obtain a certificate from your security team with the CSR. Third, with the certificate and the certificate chain from the certificate authority, the certificate can be deployed to the agent. Fourth, the agent must be restarted to apply the certificate change. And finally, SSL must be enabled to allow the agent and server to communicate over SSL. Now we'll demo the entire procedure. The first step is to create a certificate signing request for each agent through the Control-M Automation API. The API takes a JSON file for configuring the CSR. Here's my config.json for this demo. We'll submit this through the config server agent CSR create API endpoint, passing in the Control-M server and agent host names and the path to the config. Note that the file name must end in .json. In return, we'll receive a CSR file. Here's what it looks like. We'll now need a certificate from the CSR. Behind the scenes, I've submitted the CSR to my certificate authority, or CA, which automatically issued a certificate. Your organization will have its own method for certificate issuance. If you need help on this step, you'll likely need to discuss this with your organization's security team. The issued certificate and the certificate authority chain need to be in X.509 base64 encoded format for the next step. Now that we have the certificate, we'll upload it along with the CA chain to the agent with the config server agent CRT deploy endpoint, passing in the Control-M server and agent host names, as well as the agent and CA certificate files. After uploading the certificates, we'll need to restart the agent to load it in. We'll do this with the CTM config item recycle endpoint, passing in the CTMS agent parameters of the Control-M server and agent host names. Note that the Control-M server will also need to have the same CA certificate chain configured in the same manner that Inigo demonstrated in order to trust the certificate the agent received. Finally, after the Control-M server and all agents have received their certificates and been restarted, we can enable SSL on each agent with the config server agent update endpoint, passing in the Control-M server and agent host names, and setting the SSL state parameter to enabled. Within moments, the agent and server will begin communication over SSL using their new certificates. Now that you've seen how to do it, here are a few useful links regarding what we saw. This concludes this section of the webinar. Back to you, Drew.
Thank you, Daniel, for reviewing how we can use the Automation API to configure SSL connections for server-to-agent communication. Alright everyone, that concludes our session for today. On behalf of Guillermo, Inigo, and Daniel, and the entire Connect with Control-M team, thank you for spending some time with us today. We look forward to you taking advantage of features that we saw today in your environment. Stick around for the Q&A session where we will take your questions. But first, you can learn more about the BMC Education course, Control-M Fundamentals Operating, by clicking the link in the links section below, or you can visit the bit.ly link you see on the screen. Your feedback shapes our future webinars. We would appreciate if you will take a moment and answer a few questions for us in the survey that you will receive later today. You can find Control-M on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Links for each can be found in the links section below. You can watch previous webinars on the Control-M channel on YouTube. Today's webinar will be posted there within a couple of days. Let's kick off the Q&A. As a reminder, you can enter your questions on the Ask a Question section at any time.